morning. That was pretty weak. Good morning. All right. Well, we are going to talk this morning about assessment. It's not a fun topic, you might be thinking, because we've got finals next week, and that is a type of an assessment. But a lot of times we forget that assessments are actually beneficial. If you think of world-class athletes, they assess themselves, they watch video. If you think of world-class musicians, they assess themselves, they watch videos, they listen to recordings. If you think of even world-class scientists, you know, they're assessing themselves. You know, Thomas Edison was asked, hey, you failed 1,000 times trying to create a light bulb. He said, no, I got it right the one time, and that's what I was trying to do. So the whole idea here is we look at assessment in a negative way because we've kind of been trained that way. And I kind of want to blow that out of the water this morning. And the presentation or the TED Talk is not very long this morning, so I want to give you the opportunity to ask me questions. I wish I could tell you I was better at assessment, but I'm not. But I do want to tell you that if you're not assessing, you think of yourself like a ship. If you're not assessing, you're no longer the propeller, you're the anchor. Because you put yourself down and you said, this is where we're going to be, and I'm not willing to change. So you're not propelling the ship forward, you're actually holding it back a little bit. And that's dangerous. So let's talk about some big ideas of assessment real quick. So first of all, assessment is authentic. When you assess yourself, you are getting something that is authentic. When your professor next week gives you an exam, you are being able to be authentic in what you learned in his or her classroom. Is that right? Yeah. So that assessment is like, here, I am being authentic with what I know and with who I am. So that's number one. Number two, assessment is about being excellent. When people don't assess, they're willing to maintain. And when they're willing to maintain, they're willing to do what is called the status quo. And if you look at our world, that is where we are right now. I know I've shared several times about the moon landing in the 60s. 50 years ago, this past July, we landed 2 men on the moon. Guys, think about technology in 1969. The computer was so massive, it wouldn't fit in this room. And now you have a computer that is more powerful that fits in your pocket. So what we've seen over the last 50 years, yes, we've seen some great advances in technology, but we have not seen the great advancements of what they saw back in the 1960s. Because in 1963, when President Kennedy said, we're going to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, they didn't have a clue how it was going to be done. Our society is more willing to push the envelope a little bit, but to be okay with the status quo. So the next one is perfection's a myth. So that's what's going to throw us for a loop a little bit. You might say, well, why are you assessing? Because perfection is a myth. Yes, perfection is a myth. And I think a lot of times people don't want to assess because they're afraid that the light's going to be shined on them and it says, I'm not perfect. Well, get that through your head. You're going to make mistakes. It's a myth. So assessment is going to show the flaws, and that's okay. You cannot control your results, but you can control your effort. You've heard me say this over and over and over again. The problem is when we don't assess, we're letting the world decide what is good enough, and we're not really putting out our best effort. So what is assessment? Like if you go to the dictionary and you look for assessment, there's a lot of different things. But I wanted to come up with a definition that I could give you this morning, and it's this. It's a courageous, intentional, and authentic. Let's stop right there. It's courageous, it's intentional, and it's authentic. So courageous, it takes courage to say, hey, what did I do right and what did I do wrong? You're opening yourself up. It's intentional. It's thought through. It's not like, hey, great, I'm here today. I got done with my job today. I'm going to walk to my car and I'm going to assess my job today. Now it's intentional. It takes time. And it's authentic. And you're willing to look at the bad. But can I also stop you? Because a lot of times when people assess, because we see this with the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the weakness part is always bigger than everything else. We are very willing to point out our weaknesses And we're really hard on ourselves sometimes, and I think that's where assessment can go wrong too. It has to be authentic. You have to look at the good and the bad. But it's a look at your work and your priorities. I probably should have switched that. It's more of a authentic, intentional, and courageous look at your priorities and then your work, because it's about life-work balance, not work-life balance. So how do we do it? Here's a methodology. This is my methodology. This is how I do it. I start out by asking myself the question, who should assess? And I believe that everyone should assess. You were designed in the image of God. You were designed with a brain. So use your brain. Assess what you're doing. When you don't, you're actually cheating yourself. When you don't assess your day, your relationships, your schoolwork, your work, you are failing yourself. Then I also ask myself the question, who am I serving? Who is in my life that I need to make sure that I'm really serving well? So is that family? Yes, it should be. Is it your work relationship? Is it your friendship? So it starts with the who for me. The next one is, why should we assess? Well, assessment brings out the truth. I talked about that with your exams. In a few days, you're going to find out if you really knew service management. I just gave my final exam in my service management class. It showed, do they understand the material? If they don't, they missed that question. Or they missed other questions, or they couldn't address those issues in an essay question. It brings out the truth. The next thing it does, it provides an avenue for excellence. What it does, it shows me the things that I'm doing well and says, okay, Brian, keep doing these things well. And it takes more work to do things well, to continue to do things well, than to fix something that's bad. Because when things are going really well, our first reaction is, why am I messing with this? Leave it alone. I've always got to look at things going, what did I do well and how can I keep doing that well? And then it also provides you an avenue to say, okay, what did I miss the boat on? What were my weaknesses? What were those things that I didn't even know were there? Like when I go to church, there are opportunities that I have at church that I didn't even know were there until I take a step back and I'm like, okay, in my role at church, I could have done this. Okay, the next time I'm going to do this. So when you assess, the reason why, it provides you those avenues for excellence. But you're also called to be excellent. Jim Elliot said, God forgive me for being so ordinary and claiming to know an extraordinary God. You were called to be excellent. You were created in the image of God. God is excellent. So if you're created in His image, do the math, simple math, you should be excellent. So the who, everyone should assess. The why, this is what it does for you. What does it require of you? Well, it requires intentionality. You cannot just show up one day and go, you know what, it's time to assess. I haven't assessed very often. It requires a plan, and it requires mental toughness and discipline. Let's stop there on the mental toughness and discipline for a little bit. Mental toughness, when you're assessing yourself and you're asking yourself that hard question, what did I do well, what did I do wrong? You've got to be mentally tough and okay with who God created you to be, to answer the question and to say, I really dropped the ball. Or maybe you're okay with who God created you to be and you say, this is really not something I should be doing. This is better suited for Jake. We're working on a project right now with our organizations. And Jake and Natalia have this mind, but Jake's got this mind where it's all about computer science, and I don't understand a thing about that. So for me to sit there and to struggle with it would be stupid. But to take a step back and go, we've got the perfect person in the perfect position, let him do his job. That's assessment. So knowing where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses, it requires that. But it also requires discipline. If you just do it once, it doesn't matter. So what? Great, you evaluated your time one time in the last 20 years. Thank you very much. Check mark, star, whatever you want. It requires discipline. So there are times that when I'm leaving the office and I get in the car, I drive home, and one of the questions that I ask is, and I actually pray through this, God, what did I miss today that I need to do tomorrow? That's just a habit that I have. I heard this from my pastor. He says, before he even puts his feet on the floor, he says, God, give me the strength and the grace to handle what's going to happen today. And you're like, well, that just seems like something he just does, like a simple prayer, God, forgive me of my sins, bless the food. But he's honestly, and you can honestly do that in a way where you're having intentional discipline, that you're asking yourself those tough questions. So who, everyone, why, it brings out opportunities, what does it require? Discipline, mental toughness. And then back up, sorry. And then so the other thing is how you assess. You assess by asking good questions. Now, what I mean by that is, for me, when it comes to my time, I have a resource. I have an Excel document that I go through every 30 minutes, once a year, and I say, how am I spending my time? I do it for 2 weeks, and I give myself a grade on how I'm spending my time. I don't do it during the summer because summers are crazy at Cedarville. But I do it sometime in February where it's not overly crazy, but it's still a little bit busy. We're in hiring mode. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, where am I at this point with how I spend my time? When I come into the office, what are the first 2 hours like? Are they high priority? Are they being used well? I look at my time with my family. Am I using the time with my family? Am I back up at school too much, or am I home from 5 o'clock till 9 o'clock every night? I assess myself with time. That's one of the ways that I do that. Now, every year I do a SWOT analysis on myself. What are the strengths? What were my strengths? What were my weaknesses? What opportunities did God give me this year? And what are the threats that were here this year? And then I look at that, and I look at that in July so I could start to prepare my heart and my mind for August, which starts our academic year. So when you go back to assessment, you got to think that the big thing that we're trying to get you to do is to be authentic. Assessment, honestly, if you look at it from a biblical point of view, is really understanding God's truth. And God says that He is what? Truth. So when you assess, you are actually looking more and more like your Savior, and that's an important part. So assessment is authentic, but it's also excellent. Those are just the things that I do. So when I look at assessment, the biggest thing that I'm trying to do is not cross off or check off a checkbox and cross something off my to-do list. It's looking at how am I serving and what can I do better? How am I serving you, but how am I serving my family? How am I serving church? How am I serving my friends? What am I doing? Assessment is my authentic look at my own life to say, what can I do better? That's all it is. It's not rocket science, but it is extremely intimidating. So have that courage, have that intentionality, and be authentic.